The Appalachian Mountains are filled with secrets, some carved into the rock by time, others whispered in the wind between the trees. I know because I've been a park ranger for over 15 years, and I've seen things that make you question what's real. But one night, deep in the Smoky Mountains, I encountered something that still haunts me. It was late September, and the summer crowds had thinned, leaving the park eerily silent. The trees had begun to shed their leaves, and the crisp air carried the scent of damp earth. I was working a solo night shift at the park's north entrance, patrolling the more remote trails. My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Harper, we got a distress call from a campsite near Big Pine Loop. A woman said she saw something strange. Can you check it out?" "Copy that," I responded, already gripping my flashlight. The dirt road to Big Pine Loop was narrow and winding. The forest pressed in on both sides, and in the weak glow of my headlights, the trees seemed to shift like living things. By the time I reached the campsite, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows. A woman in her early 30s stood near her tent, arms crossed. Her face was pale, her eyes darting toward the woods behind her. "Are you the one who called?" I asked, stepping out of the vehicle. She nodded. I think someone's out there," she stammered. "But it's not a person." That sent a chill up my spine. "Tell me what happened." She hesitated before speaking. I was sitting by the fire when I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I saw it. It looked like a ranger. That threw me off. "A ranger?" "Yes. He was wearing a uniform like yours, but something was wrong. He was too tall, and his eyes..." She shuddered. "His eyes were just empty." I called out, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, staring. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. "Where did you see him?" She pointed to the dense woods beyond her tent. I moved toward the trees, my hand resting on the grip of my sidearm. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating twisted branches and dry leaves. Then I saw the tracks, boot prints, but they weren't normal. The steps were too far apart, as if whoever made them had unnaturally long legs. And then the tracks just stopped. No sign of turning around, no sign of backtracking. It was as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. I swallowed hard and turned back to the woman. "Pack your things, I'll escort you to your car." She didn't argue. As we loaded her gear, I kept my flashlight trained on the woods. I could feel something watching us. And then, just as she was about to get into her car, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees was a figure in a park ranger uniform. But the uniform was old, like something from the 1950s. His hat was cocked at an odd angle, and his limbs seemed too long, his posture unnatural. And his eyes, they were nothing but hollow black pits. He grinned. I grabbed my radio, but it was just static. The woman saw him too. She let out a strangled gasp and scrambled into her car, locking the doors. The figure took a slow, deliberate step forward. I did the only thing I could. I drew my weapon and aimed. "Stop! Identify yourself." No response. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Not disappeared into the trees, not ran away, just gone. The woman peeled out of the lot, tires kicking up gravel. I stood there for what felt like hours before finally getting back into my truck, my hands shaking. The next morning, I went to the ranger station and pulled up old reports. I needed answers, and that's when I found it. In 1953, a ranger named William Grayson had gone missing near Big Pine Loop. They never found his body. But there were stories, campers claiming to see a ranger who wasn't quite human, other rangers hearing footsteps at night only to find no one there, a shadow moving between the trees. I don't patrol Big Pine Loop anymore because I know he's still out there, watching, waiting.
Story number 2.
The cold air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as I pulled up to the ranger station. It was my 3rd week as a seasonal park ranger in the deep wilderness of Montana, and I had already heard my fair share of strange stories. Other rangers spoke in hushed voices about things that didn't make sense. Campers disappearing without a trace, eerie noises at night, and sightings of something lurking just beyond the tree line. I didn't pay much attention, at least not until the night I found the abandoned cabin. I was on solo patrol near Black Hollow, one of the most remote areas of the park. It was the kind of place where cell phones were useless, and even the radio barely worked. The trail was overgrown, and the deeper I went, the more unnatural the silence became. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. A cabin. It shouldn't have been there. This part of the park had been closed off for decades, ever since a flood had washed out most of the roads. The structure was old, the wood dark and rotting. The windows were shattered and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. It looked like something out of a nightmare. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Stepping closer, I called out, "Hello? Park ranger? Is anyone in there?" Silence. Then a noise. A slow, deliberate scraping sound from inside. My heart pounded as I reached for my flashlight and stepped onto the rickety porch. I nudged the door open with my boot, shining the beam inside. Dust swirled in the air. The cabin was empty except for a broken table, some old chairs, and what looked like deep claw marks along the wooden floor. Then I noticed the smell. Rotten. Sour, like meat left out in the sun for too long. Something was wrong. As I stepped further in, my radio crackled. Static. Then a voice. Not one I recognized. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. More static. Then silence. I turned on my heel, ready to get the hell out of there. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just outside the window. It wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly thin, its skin stretched too tight over its bones. Its eyes were black voids sunken deep into its skull, and its mouth, too wide, too unnatural, curled into a grin. It was watching me. My breath caught in my throat as the thing moved. Not walked, glided. 1 second it was outside, and the next, the door creaked behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I backed toward the entrance, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. But before I could move, something whispered. Right. Behind. Meve. I bolted. Racing out of the cabin, I nearly tripped down the steps. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran until my lungs burned and my truck came into view. Slamming the door shut, I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, gravel flying beneath my tires. As I sped down the old dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure stood at the tree line, still watching, and it was smiling. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went straight to my supervisor and told him everything. I expected him to laugh, to tell me I was just spooked. Instead, his face went pale. "You found Black Hollow Cabin?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. "You shouldn't have gone there." I swallowed hard. "Why?" He hesitated before answering. "That cabin belonged to a trapper named Elijah Boone. He lived out there alone back in the 1800s. When he stopped coming into town for supplies, folks went looking for him. They found his cabin, but not him." I frowned. "What do you mean?" No sign of him, just deep claw marks in the walls and floors, like something had been in there with him. I felt my stomach drop. "They say his spirit never left," my supervisor continued, "that he still haunts those woods, and that he doesn't like visitors." I was silent. Then he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the first ranger to see something out there, but if you're smart, you'll make sure you're the last." I never went near Black Hollow again, but sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear the whispers.
Story number 3.
The night was colder than usual for late October, and the dense fog rolled through the trees like ghostly fingers reaching for something unseen. I was deep in the heart of Redwood National Park, working a late shift alone. Being a park ranger was something I had always dreamed of, but after that night, I started questioning whether some places were never meant to be patrolled. It started with a call that came in over the radio just past midnight. "Ranger Carter, we received a report of a missing camper near the old fire tower. Can you check it out?" I frowned, gripping the wheel of my truck a little tighter. The old fire tower had been abandoned for decades, and campers weren't supposed to be anywhere near it. It was deep in the woods, far from any marked trails, and people who went looking for it usually didn't come back with good stories. I acknowledged the call and started down the long, winding dirt road toward the tower. The headlights barely cut through the thick fog, making the towering redwoods look even more massive, their ancient limbs stretching into the darkness. About halfway there, something strange happened. My radio crackled again, but this time there was no voice, just breathing. Slow, ragged, almost like someone struggling to take their last breath. Then, help, a single word barely above a whisper. I grabbed the radio. "This is Ranger Carter. Who is this? Do you need assistance?" Static, then laughter. Soft at first, then growing louder, more distorted. And then silence. I swallowed hard and kept driving. The road narrowed, the trees closing in. Finally, through the fog, the fire tower came into view. It was a skeletal structure of rusted metal and rotting wood, looming over the treetops like a forgotten relic. I parked, stepped out, and immediately felt it. Something was wrong. The forest was dead silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, no chirping insects. Just an oppressive, suffocating stillness. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area. That's when I saw the footprints. Barefoot. Deep. Leading straight to the base of the tower, and something else, drag marks beside them, like someone had been pulled. I hesitated, then followed the tracks. The first few steps up the old wooden stairs creaked beneath my weight. I had my hand on my holster, every nerve in my body on high alert. The higher I climbed, the more the air seemed to thicken, pressing in on me like something unseen was watching. Then as I reached the top platform, my flashlight flickered, and I saw her. A woman crouched in the corner of the tower, her back to me. Her long, tangled hair covered her face, and her thin, pale arms were wrapped tightly around her knees. I took a cautious step forward. "Ma'am, are you okay?" No response. I glanced at her feet. They were bare, covered in dirt and scratches. The footprints I had followed were hers. I swallowed, gripping my flashlight tighter. "Ma'am, I'm with the Park Service. I need to know if you're hurt." Slowly, too slowly, she turned her head toward me, and my blood ran cold. Her face, what little I could see of it, was wrong. Her skin was stretched too tightly over her bones, her eyes too large, too dark, and her mouth was a jagged, gaping wound, curling upward in an unnatural grin. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Before I could react, she moved. Not like a person, more like a puppet with its strings yanked. 1 second she was crouched in the corner. The next, she was standing. Then she lunged. I stumbled back, nearly falling over the railing, my flashlight dropping and clattering to the floor. My hand went to my gun, but before I could pull it, the woman, or whatever she was, let out a sound that still haunts me, a shrill, ear-piercing screech, like a dying animal mixed with static. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone, vanished. The tower was empty. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I didn't waste time getting out of there. Practically flying down the stairs, I ran to my truck and threw it into drive. Gravel kicked up behind me as I sped back to the station, my hands shaking the entire way. The next morning, I filed my report. I expected my supervisor to laugh it off. Maybe tell me I had imagined things, that the fog had played tricks on my mind. Instead, he was quiet. Then he sighed and pulled a thick, dusty file from his desk. "You're not the first, Carter," he said, sliding the file toward me. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were decades' worth of reports, all about the fire tower, all about sightings of the woman, campers who had disappeared, rangers who had seen her and never came back the same. One report, dated back to 1987, caught my eye. It detailed the story of a young woman who had gone missing near the fire tower. They found her body days later at the base of the structure, her face frozen in an expression of pure terror. But the strangest part? Her footprints led up to the tower, but none came back down. I don't go near that place anymore. And if you ever find yourself in Redwood National Park, deep in the woods where the fog never quite lifts, stay away from the fire tower, because she's still there, waiting.
Story number 4.
I had been a park ranger in Wyoming for over a decade, and I thought I had seen it all. Lost hikers, dangerous wildlife, even the occasional body recovery. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered in Devil's Ravine. The place had always had a reputation. Other rangers avoided it when they could, and old-timers spoke about it in hushed voices, like saying the name too loud would summon something from the trees. People disappeared there. Strange lights were seen at night. Shadows moved when there was nothing to cast them. I never believed the stories, not until I had to go in myself. It started with a distress call just before sunset. A teenage boy named Lucas had gone missing while hiking with his family. 1 second he was walking ahead on the trail, and the next, gone. No sound, no sign of struggle, just gone. His parents were frantic, and night was closing in fast. I knew the risks of searching in the dark, but time wasn't on our side. I radioed for backup and headed toward Devil's Ravine with my flashlight and rifle. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, chirping crickets, had vanished. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath. I called out Lucas's name, my voice swallowed by the stillness. Then, far ahead on the path, I saw something move. A figure, small, standing just between the trees. My breath caught. It was a child, Lucas. I quickened my pace, relief washing over me. "Lucas, stay right there. I'm coming to get you." He didn't move. I stopped. My flashlight beam landed on him, and something was wrong. His back was to me, his posture rigid. He stood perfectly still, facing into the tree as if listening to something I couldn't hear. A deep, instinctual dread filled me. "Lucas?" I called again, more cautiously this time. Slowly, he turned his head, but not his body. Just his head, at an angle that should not have been possible, and his face, it wasn't a child's face. It was wrong. Too stretched, too smooth, the features distorted like a melted wax figure. His mouth was slightly open, but there were no lips, no teeth, just darkness. Then he spoke, not in a child's voice, not in any human voice. Lost. The word came out garbled as if spoken underwater, layered with something deeper, something ancient. I took a step back, gripping my rifle. "Where is Lucas?" The thing tilted its head, studying me. Then it smiled, a slow, unnatural widening of that black void where a mouth should have been, and in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, it whispered, "Right here." I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. The trees blurred past me as I sprinted down the trail, my boots pounding against the earth. Behind me, I heard it moving. Fast. Too fast. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, but the footsteps, they weren't footsteps. They were something else, something sliding, slithering. The thing was keeping up. I didn't dare look back. I burst through the trees and into a clearing where my truck was parked, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them onto the dirt. Then, silence. I hesitated, my chest heaving. The forest was still again. Nothing moved. Cautiously, I turned. There was nothing there. No child. No monster. Just the whispering trees and the suffocating darkness. I grabbed my keys and threw myself into the truck, locking the doors. My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Holt, come in. Did you find the boy?" My throat was dry. I forced myself to respond. Negative. No sign of him. The search continued through the night, more rangers joining in, but Lucas was never found. His footprints stopped in the middle of the trail. No signs of struggle, no animal tracks. Just gone. I filed my report, told them I lost the trail in the dark. I didn't tell them what I saw. No one would have believed me. Months later, another report came in. A camper claimed he saw a boy standing alone near Devil's Ravine. He called out, but the boy didn't respond, just stood there, staring. Then he smiled, and the camper ran. Just like I did, not just like I anymore. I don't go near Devil's Ravine anymore, because I know the truth. Lucas never left those woods, or maybe something else left in his place.
Story number 5.
I've been a park ranger for over 15 years, and I've heard plenty of strange stories. Campers vanishing, strange lights in the woods, eerie whispers when no one else is around. Most of the time, they're just legends. But sometimes, they're not. The worst experience of my career happened 5 years ago in Blackthorn National Park. The memory still keeps me awake at night. It started with a 911 call from a distressed hiker. The dispatcher barely made out what she was saying, just fragments of a panicked voice. "It's not human. It's watching me. Please." Then the call cut off. By the time it was relayed to us, it was already late afternoon. I was closest to the area where the call had come from, an old, disused trail known as Widow's Path. It had been closed off years ago due to unstable terrain, but people still hiked it from time to time. I grabbed my gear and headed out alone, thinking it was just another lost camper who had let their imagination get the best of them. I was wrong. The deeper I went into Widow's Path, the quieter the forest became. Birds stopped chirping. The wind stopped blowing. The only sound was my boots crunching against the damp earth. Then I smelled it. Rot, not the usual scent of decay you'd expect in the wild. This was different. It was thick, heavy, clinging to the air like a disease, the kind of smell that made your stomach twist. I kept going. About a mile in, I found something that made my skin crawl. A phone. It was half buried in the dirt. Screen shattered. When I picked it up, I saw the last thing the owner had recorded. A video. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing a shaky shot of the woods. A young woman's voice, whispering, barely holding back sobs. I don't know what it is. It looks like a person, but... The camera swung wildly, landing on something in the distance. I froze. It was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its arms too long for its body. It stood between the trees, motionless. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then its head snapped toward the camera. The video cut off. I felt my stomach drop. The phone's battery was dead. I stood there, gripping the broken device, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, I heard a sound. A whisper. Low. Raspy. My name. I turned, rifle raised. Nothing. The forest was still. Then, ahead on the trail, something moved. A shadow shifting between the trees. I called out. Park ranger. If you need help, make yourself known. No response. Then movement again, closer this time, something just at the edge of my vision. I took a step back, and then from right behind me, a voice. Not a whisper this time. A perfect, flawless imitation of my own voice. Help me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My blood ran cold. I needed to get out, now. I turned back toward the trail, picking up my pace. Every step felt like something was right behind me, just out of sight. Watching. Then ahead, I saw movement again. At first, I thought it was a person. A woman, crouched down, shaking. Relief flooded through me. The missing hiker. I called out, but she didn't react. As I got closer, I noticed something was off. Her arms were wrong, too long. Her fingers dug into the dirt, twitching. And her head. It was bent at an unnatural angle, her face hidden beneath tangled hair. Every part of me screamed to run. Then she moved. Not like a person, like something learning how to be one. Her head snapped up, and I finally saw her face. Or rather, what should have been a face. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin. Then it grinned. I don't know how, I still can't explain it. It had no mouth, but it grinned. I turned and ran. I don't remember getting back to my truck. 1 second I was in those woods. The next I was speeding down the dirt road, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Backup arrived within the hour. We searched the area, but there was no sign of the woman, no footprints, no phone, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. Officially, the case remains unsolved. The missing hiker was never found. But I know the truth. She didn't disappear. She was taken. And something else took her place, something that's still out there, waiting, watching, and learning.
Story number 6.
The first time I heard about the thing in Raven's Hollow, I thought it was just another campfire story. Other park rangers whispered about it during night shifts, stories of hikers who wandered too far off the trail, of eerie noises echoing through the trees, of something lurking in the dark that wasn't quite human. I laughed it off like everyone else, until the night I found the cabin. It was mid-September, just as the air started to carry that early bite of autumn. I was assigned to patrol the outer perimeter of Raven's Hollow, a remote section of the park that had been off-limits for years. A call had come in earlier that evening. An illegal campsite had been spotted deep in the forest near the old mining road. My job was to check it out, issue citations if needed, and send the campers packing. Simple. Or at least it should have been. I started down the trail just after sunset, the last rays of light filtering through the dense canopy above. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of my boots against the dirt path. Then I smelled it. Rot. Faint at first, but growing stronger with each step. The air turned thick, almost oily, clinging to the back of my throat. Something was dead nearby. Probably an animal, I told myself. Maybe a deer. Then I saw the cabin. It wasn't supposed to be there. The map showed nothing in this area, no structures, no ruins, just untouched forest. But there it was, standing in the clearing like it had been waiting for me. It was old. The wood had darkened with age, the roof sagging under the weight of time. The windows were just empty black squares, and the door stood slightly open, swaying gently in the breeze. I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't abandoned, like it was watching me. But I had a job to do. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. The floorboards groaned as I entered, the air inside thick with dust and decay. My flashlight flickered, casting long, jittery shadows against the walls. The first thing I noticed were the claw marks, deep, ragged gashes in the wooden walls as if something had tried to tear its way out. I swallowed hard. Then my radio crackled. Static. Then a voice. At first I thought it was dispatch, but as the sound cleared, my blood ran cold. Because it was my voice. Hello? The exact way I had said it when I stepped inside. I froze. Then a whisper. Not from the radio, from behind me. Turn around. I did. And for the first time in my life, I knew what it was like to feel real, primal terror. Because standing in the doorway was me. Same uniform, same face, same wide, horrified eyes staring back at me. It grinned, and I ran. I don't remember getting out of the cabin. 1 second I was inside. The next I was tearing through the forest, branches slashing at my arms, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I locked the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. As I sped down the dirt road, my headlights cut through the darkness. And then something stepped onto the road. I barely had time to react. I slammed the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. Standing in the middle of the road was me, motionless, staring, grinning. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I threw the truck in reverse, my tires spinning against the dirt. The thing didn't move, just watched. Then as I backed away, it slowly raised one hand and waved. I don't patrol Ravens Hollow anymore. I don't go near the cabin, but sometimes late at night when I'm alone in the ranger station, the radio crackles, and I hear my own voice whispering back. Hello?
Story number 7.
I've been a park ranger for nearly 15 years, and in that time, I've dealt with all kinds of strange things. Missing hikers, wild animals behaving aggressively, even unexplained lights deep in the woods. But nothing ever truly terrified me until I spent a night at Hollow Creek. It started with a missing persons report. A man named Daniel Pierce had been camping alone near Hollow Creek, a secluded part of the park that was rarely visited. When he failed to return home, his brother called us. I volunteered to check it out. I knew Hollow Creek well enough to be cautious. The place had a reputation. Hikers who went too far off trail sometimes disappeared without a trace. Those who came back spoke of strange noises at night, of whispers on the wind, of something watching from the trees. Most people avoided it. Daniel Pierce hadn't. The hike to his last known location took about 3 hours. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the silence, it was the stillness. Not a single bird, not a rustling leaf. The air felt thick, almost electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. When I reached his campsite, I knew something was wrong. The fire pit was cold, the tent half collapsed. His backpack was still there, his supplies untouched. A chill crept up my spine. No camper just leaves everything behind like that. I called out his name. Nothing. Then I noticed the footprints. Barefoot, leading away from the campsite. I hesitated. They weren't spaced like normal steps. They were too far apart, like he had been running. But the way they sank into the dirt, it was like something had been dragging him. I followed the trail, my hand resting on the grip of my pistol. The prints led me deeper into the woods, toward a part of the park that wasn't on any official map. Then I saw the cabin. It was ancient, barely more than a pile of rotting logs. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. I stepped inside. The stench of rot hit me instantly. The air was damp, heavy. My flashlight beam swept across the interior, empty shelves, a rusted stove, a broken table. Then I saw the walls. They were covered in scratches, long, deep gouges like someone had raked their nails against the wood, and words carved over and over again. Let me go. A loud thud came from the back of the cabin. I spun, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Daniel? I called. Silence. Then another sound. Breathing. Low, ragged breathing just beyond the doorway at the back of the cabin. I stepped closer. The door was cracked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I reached out, and then something moved. A shape, pale, twisted, crawling on all fours. It was human, but not. Its limbs were too long, its skin stretched too tight over its bones, its fingers scraped against the wood as it pulled itself forward, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. And then, in a voice that wasn't Daniel's, "Help me." I ran. I don't remember getting back to my truck. One moment I was in that cabin, the next I was speeding down the dirt road, my heart hammering in my chest. Backup arrived within the hour. We searched the area. No cabin, no footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Daniel Pierce was never found. But sometimes when I'm on patrol near Hollow Creek, I hear something in the trees, a whisper, a voice, "Help me."